He's gone. We need to leave now. The words, so softly spoken yet so urgent, cut through the noise of O'Hare International Airport like a knife. I turned to look at my 7-year-old granddaughter, Bethany, whose small hand suddenly gripped mine with surprising strength. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" I asked, watching my son Robert's plane taxi away from the gate. "We just said goodbye to your dad. He'll be back from London in a week." But Bethany's eyes weren't on the departing plane. They were fixed on something or someone behind us, her normally cheerful face suddenly pale and serious. "We have to go, Grandma Helena. Now." Her voice trembled slightly, but her grip remained firm as she tugged me toward the exit. I'd spent 68 years developing the habit of listening to children when they spoke with such conviction. Something in her tone, an echo of her father's decisiveness, made me glance casually over my shoulder as if checking the departure board. If you're watching, please subscribe to the channel, like it, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. 2 men in dark suits stood near the security checkpoint, their attention fixed unmistakably on us. Nothing in their appearance was overtly threatening, yet something about their stance, the deliberate way they surveyed the terminal while maintaining awareness of our position, triggered a long-dormant alarm in my mind. "All right, let's get to the car," I agreed, adjusting my handbag on my shoulder and guiding Bethany toward the exit with forced casualness. It's getting late anyway. We moved through the crowded terminal at a measured pace, not too fast to draw attention, but with clear purpose. Bethany stayed close to my side, her favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Carrots, clutched tightly to her chest. "Are they following us, Grandma?" she whispered as we stepped onto the escalator leading to the parking garage. I resisted the urge to look back. "How did you know about those men, Bethany?" "Daddy said they might come. He said if I saw men in dark suits watching us after he left, I should tell you we need to leave right away." Her voice was barely audible over the ambient noise of the airport. A chill ran through me. Robert, my practical, rational son, who worked as a financial director at Global Meridian Investments, had never been prone to paranoia or melodrama. If he had warned his daughter about potential watchers, he must have had serious reasons. The parking garage was half empty, our sedan parked in a row of vehicles on the 3rd level. As we approached, I casually scanned the area, spotting a dark SUV with tinted windows idling 2 rows over. The driver appeared to be speaking into a phone or radio. "Bethany," I said quietly, "did your father tell you anything else? Anything I should know?" She nodded solemnly. "He said if the bad men came, I should give you Mr. Carrots. He has something special inside." She hesitated. "And Daddy said not to use our phones. They can listen." I unlocked the car, helping Bethany into the back seat and securing her seatbelt before walking around to the driver's side. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the elevator doors open, revealing the 2 men from the terminal. Decades of teaching high school history hadn't prepared me for this moment. But the years I'd spent as a single mother after my husband's early death had taught me one crucial lesson. When protecting family, hesitation is your worst enemy. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking space, driving normally toward the exit. The SUV I'd noticed earlier also began moving, falling into position several cars behind us. At the payment booth, I handed over cash rather than using the credit card I normally would have, a decision prompted by Bethany's warning about phones. If they could listen to calls, electronic payments would leave an equally clear trail. As we merged onto the highway, I made a split-second decision to avoid our usual route home to the Chicago suburbs. Instead, I took the exit for downtown, entering the maze of the city where we might lose our followers in the evening traffic. "Bethany," I said, keeping my voice calm while checking the mirrors constantly, "I need you to give me Mr. Carrots now." She passed the worn stuffed rabbit forward, its once white fur now gray with years of love. "Daddy said you'd need to look inside the special pocket." I handed the rabbit back. "Hold him for now. When we get somewhere safe, I'll look." "Are we in danger, Grandma?" she asked, her voice small but steady. I met her eyes in the rearview mirror, struck by how much she resembled Robert at that age, the same serious expression when confronting difficult truths. "I'm not sure yet, sweetheart, but your father clearly wanted us to be careful, so that's what we're going to do." The SUV remained several cars behind us, too consistent to be coincidence. I made a series of random turns through the city streets, confirming my suspicion when it adjusted course to match our seemingly erratic path. My mind raced with questions. What had Robert gotten himself involved in? Why hadn't he warned me directly? What information could be so dangerous that it would make my accountant's son turn his daughter into a secret messenger? I pulled into the underground parking garage of a large downtown hotel, driving to the lowest level before finding a space partially obscured by a concrete pillar. After turning off the engine, I sat still for a moment, gathering my thoughts. "Let me see, Mr. "Carrots now, Bettany." She handed me the stuffed rabbit, watching intently as I examined it. A small, nearly invisible seam ran along its back, different from the factory stitching. I carefully pulled it open, revealing a hidden pocket. Inside was a small USB drive and a handwritten note in Robert's precise handwriting. "Mom, if you're reading this, it means we're all in danger. I couldn't tell you directly. They're watching me too closely. I've uncovered financial evidence of massive corruption and illegal weapons deals at Global Meridian. The USB contains proof, but it's encrypted. You'll need the password. Do not go home. Do not use credit cards or phones. They have resources everywhere. Go to the public library downtown. In the history section, find American Century by Evans, Dad's favorite. Page 187 has the next instructions. Trust no one except Thomas Miller at the Chicago Tribune. He's expecting the evidence. I'm sorry to put you and Bettany in this position. Keep her safe. I'll contact you when I can. Love, Robert." I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket along with the USB drive, my hands shaking slightly as the reality of our situation began to sink in. My son, always the most cautious and ethical person I knew, had apparently stumbled onto something dangerous enough to send him fleeing the country and to turn his mother and daughter into fugitives. "What did Daddy say?" Bettany asked, her young face showing a maturity beyond her years. "That we need to be very brave," I replied, starting the car again, "and that we have a very important mission." As we exited the parking garage through a different ramp, I caught sight of the black SUV circling the hotel entrance, searching for us. We had gained a temporary advantage, but I knew it wouldn't last long. For 40 years, I'd been Helena Carter, widow, history teacher, grandmother. A woman whose greatest adventures had been lived vicariously through books. Now, in the space of 30 minutes, I had become something else entirely, a guardian of dangerous secrets, a runner from unnamed threats, protector of both my granddaughter and whatever explosive truth my son had risked everything to expose. The Chicago evening spread before us, its familiar skyline suddenly seeming alien and full of potential threats. I checked the mirrors one more time and set course for the downtown public library, wondering how many other ordinary lives had been upended by a single whispered warning. "He's gone. We need to leave now." 6 simple words that had changed everything. The Chicago Public Library stood like a fortress of knowledge against the darkening sky, its massive stone facade illuminated by strategically placed lights. Under different circumstances, I would have appreciated its grandeur. Tonight, it represented only a temporary haven, a place to find the next breadcrumb in whatever trail Robert had left for us. I parked 2 blocks away in a public garage, paying cash again. Before leaving the car, I rummaged through the emergency bag I kept in the trunk, a habit formed during harsh Midwestern winters, finding a baseball cap and light jacket for myself and a hooded sweatshirt for Bettany. "We're going to play a game," I told her as we walked toward the library, my eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "We're going to pretend to be different people for a little while, like actors in a play." Bettany nodded solemnly. "Because of the bad men?" "Yes, sweetheart, just to be safe." "I can be Elsa," she declared, referring to her favorite character from the movies she watched endlessly. "And you can be Anna," I supplied, grateful for her ability to frame our situation as an adventure rather than a nightmare. "Sisters stick together, right?" Her small hand squeezed mine in agreement as we climbed the library steps. Inside, the cavernous main hall buzzed with the quiet energy of evening patrons, students hunched over laptops, elderly men reading newspapers, young professionals browsing new releases. We blended into this tableau of normalcy, just a grandmother and granddaughter visiting the library on a weeknight. The history section occupied most of the 3rd floor, rows of shelves creating a labyrinth of knowledge spanning centuries and continents. I moved with purpose, years of teaching history giving me an intuitive sense of where to look. American history, mid-20th century. There it would be. "American Century by Evans," I murmured, running my fingers along the spines until I found it. a thick volume with a faded dust jacket showing the iconic image of Times Square on VJ Day. My late husband, James, had indeed loved this book, keeping a copy in his study throughout our marriage. Robert's reference wasn't random. He was using family knowledge as security, information that wouldn't appear in any database mining of our personal details. I pulled the volume from the shelf and turned to page 187, my heart racing. There, tucked between pages detailing the Marshall Plan, was a small envelope. I slipped it into my pocket without examining its contents, returned the book to its place, and guided Bethany toward the children's section. "Can we get some books, Grandma?" she asked as we passed colorful displays. "Not today, sweetheart. We need to keep moving." I softened the denial with a gentle squeeze of her shoulder. "But maybe you could choose one for me to tell you about later, from memory." While Bethany deliberated between picture books displayed on a revolving rack, I found a quiet corner and quickly examined the envelope's contents. Inside was a small key, old-fashioned, possibly for a safety deposit box, and another note in Robert's handwriting, First National Bank, Box 1547. Access code is Dad's birthday plus Bethany's. Go tomorrow morning when it opens. Inside is everything Miller needs. Tonight, stay somewhere unexpected. They'll check hotels under your name and credit cards. The password for the USB, Carrots and Cabbages 2016. Be careful, Mom. These people have resources and connections everywhere. Trust your instincts. I memorized the contents before tearing the note into tiny pieces and disposing of them in separate trash bins throughout the library. The key went into the small zippered pocket inside my handbag, alongside the USB drive. As I returned to the children's section, a movement near the elevator caught my attention. A man in a dark suit speaking quietly into his wrist, his eyes scanning the floor with methodical precision. My pulse quickened. They had found us more quickly than I'd anticipated. Bethany was still engrossed in the picture books, unaware of the danger. I approached her casually, bending down as if to see her selection. "We need to leave now, through the back stairs," I whispered, gesturing toward the emergency exit at the far end of the floor. "Remember, we're still playing our game. Walk normally, but quickly." Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded, clutching Mr. Carrots tighter as we moved between the shelves, using the library's layout to obscure our path from the man by the elevator. The emergency exit opened onto a stairwell that descended all the way to the basement level. We hurried down, the sound of our footsteps echoing despite my attempts at quietness. At the bottom, a service corridor led to a loading dock where library staff were unloading boxes from a delivery van. I guided Bethany past them with a confident nod, as if we belonged, emerging onto a side street away from the main entrance. Night had fully descended now, the city transformed into a landscape of shadows and artificial light. "Where are we going, Grandma?" Bethany asked, as we walked briskly away from the library, her small legs working double time to keep pace. A good question, one I was still answering myself. We couldn't go home. Robert had been clear about that. Hotels required ID and credit cards. Friends or other family members would be obvious places for these people with resources to look. Then I remembered Maria Vasquez, a former student who had become a friend over the years. She managed a small apartment building in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood on the west side, catering to new immigrants and visiting relatives who sometimes needed accommodation without paperwork or questions. "We're going to visit a friend," I told Bethany, flagging down a taxi at the corner. "Someone who can help us." In the taxi, I gave the driver an address 3 blocks from Maria's building, unwilling to leave a direct trail. Bethany leaned against me, fatigue finally catching up with her after the stress and excitement of our escape. "You're being so brave," I whispered, stroking her hair. "Your dad would be proud." "Is Daddy in trouble?" she asked, her voice muffled against my side. "He's trying to fix something that's wrong," I answered carefully. "Sometimes doing the right thing can be dangerous, but it's still important to do it." She nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Like in Harry Potter, when they have to fight Voldemort, even though it's scary." "Exactly like that," I agreed, marveling at how children could often distill complex moral situations to their essence. Maria's building was a modest 3-story walk-up on a street lined with similar structures, their facades brightened by window boxes and cultural touches that transformed institutional architecture into homes. The neighborhood hummed with evening life, families chatting on stoops, music drifting from open windows, the scent of various cuisines mingling in the air. Maria answered her door with surprise that quickly shifted to concern as she took in our appearance and the urgency in my eyes. "Helena, what brings you here so late? And with the little one too?" "Maria, I need a favor," I said quietly. "We need a place to stay tonight, somewhere no one would think to look for us, and I need to borrow your laptop if possible." To her credit, Maria asked no questions beyond what was necessary. Within 20 minutes, we were settled in a small but clean studio apartment on the 3rd floor, typically used for visiting relatives. She brought us a laptop, some basic toiletries, and a bag of food from her own kitchen. "Whatever trouble you're in, Helena, you know you can trust me," she said at the door. "It's better if you don't know the details," I replied, touched by her unhesitating help. "But thank you. We won't stay long, just tonight." After she left, I made a simple dinner from the food she'd provided, watching Bettany eat with relief. Children were remarkably resilient, but they still needed the basics: food, rest, and a sense of security, however provisional. Once she was tucked into bed, Mr. Carrots clutched to her chest. I sat at the small table by the window and inserted the USB drive into Maria's laptop. A single encrypted file appeared, requesting a password. I typed in "Carrots and Cabbages 2016" and held my breath. The file opened, revealing hundreds of documents, financial records, emails, meeting transcripts, and photographs. I wasn't a financial expert, but even to my untrained eye, the evidence was damning. Global Meridian Investments had apparently been facilitating money laundering for several drug cartels and terrorist organizations, disguising the transactions as legitimate investments while skimming millions in fees. Worse, they had been financing weapons deals to conflict zones under embargo, using humanitarian aid organizations as fronts. Names of high-ranking executives appeared throughout, including several who held positions in regulatory bodies and government agencies. The corruption wasn't just within the company, it had metastasized into the very systems designed to prevent such activities. No wonder Robert had fled. No wonder he couldn't risk direct communication. The people implicated in these documents had everything to lose if this information became public. I closed the files and removed the USB drive, my hands trembling slightly. Tomorrow, we would need to access the safety deposit box and then find this Thomas Miller at the Chicago Tribune. But for tonight, our only job was to rest and remain hidden. From the bed, Bettany's voice drifted softly through the darkness. "Grandma, are we going to be okay?" I moved to sit beside her, brushing the hair from her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. Your dad trusted us with something very important, and we're going to help him make things right." She nodded sleepily, already drifting off. "I knew you would know what to do. Daddy said you were the bravest person he ever knew." The words caught me by surprise, a warm counterpoint to the fear and uncertainty that had dominated the evening. In Robert's eyes, apparently, I wasn't just a retired history teacher who made good cookies and remembered birthdays. I was someone capable of facing danger, of protecting what mattered when everything was at stake. As I returned to my vigil by the window, watching the street below for any sign of unusual activity, I wondered if he was right. Bravery had never been how I would have described myself. Practical, perhaps, determined, resilient. But brave? The night stretched before us, filled with unknowns. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, in this small apartment far from our comfortable suburban existence, I made a silent promise to my absent son and the sleeping child who trusted me so completely. I would become whatever this situation required: brave, cunning, resourceful. The people hunting us might have resources and connections, but I had something more powerful: a lifetime of underestimation as an elderly woman and the fierce, uncompromising love of a grandmother protecting her family. They wouldn't see me coming, and that would be their mistake. Dawn broke over Chicago, painting the city skyline in shades of amber and gold that belied the danger lurking in its streets. I had slept fitfully, jerking awake at every distant siren or raised voice from the street below. Now, watching Bettany sleep peacefully with Mr. Carrots tucked under her chin, I allowed myself a moment of doubt. Was I truly equipped for this? At 68, my expertise lay in explaining the Treaty of Versailles to restless teenagers, not outmaneuvering corporate assassins. Yet here I was, planning our approach to a bank as if it were a military operation, all based on cryptic instructions from my son, who was now halfway across the Atlantic. Bethany stirred, her eyes opening with that peculiar clarity children sometimes possess upon waking. No gradual transition, just an immediate presence. "Are we going to see Daddy today?" she asked, sitting up and rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Not today, sweetheart," I answered, helping her out of bed. "Today we're going to follow the next clue your father left us, like a treasure hunt." She brightened at this framing. "With the key you found in the book?" "Exactly. But first, breakfast." Maria had slipped a bag outside our door containing fresh clothes for both of us, simple, practical items that would help us blend into the city crowd. There was also a note informing me she had called in a favor from her cousin who drove a taxi. He would take us wherever we needed to go, no questions asked. By 8:30, we were in her cousin Ramon's taxi, heading toward the downtown financial district. I had explained to Bethany the importance of our game continuing. We would use different names, avoid drawing attention, and most importantly, she should never mention her father or why we were really at the bank. "If anyone asks, we're just getting some of Grandma's special jewelry out of the box," I told her, as the taxi navigated morning traffic. "Can you remember that?" She nodded solemnly. "I'm good at remembering things. Daddy says I have an elephant's memory." First National Bank occupied a limestone building that exuded stability and tradition, attributes that had once seemed reassuring but now felt like a facade concealing darker truths. How many other transactions within these respectable walls served purposes like those documented in Robert's files? Ramon agreed to wait for us, finding a spot near a coffee shop across the street. I took Bethany's hand as we ascended the broad stone steps, consciously adjusting my posture to project confidence rather than the apprehension churning inside me. The lobby bustled with morning activity, tellers serving early customers, business people making deposits, security guards casually surveying the space. I approached the information desk, where a young woman greeted us with a professional smile. "Good morning. How may I help you today?" "I need to access my safety deposit box, please," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Number 1547. "Of course. May I see your identification?" I presented my driver's license, breathing an internal sigh of relief when she merely glanced at it before typing something into her computer. If the people pursuing us had already flagged my identification, we would know very soon. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. And I see this box has a registered access code?" "Yes," I confirmed, combining the two dates as Robert had instructed. EO 615-0924. My husband's birthday, June 15th, followed by Bethany's, September 24th. Another piece of family knowledge that wouldn't appear in any financial database. The woman nodded and directed us to a seating area while a bank officer was summoned to escort us to the vault. Bethany sat quietly beside me, swinging her legs and clutching Mr. Carrots, the picture of innocence. I scanned the lobby carefully, noting each person who entered, alert for dark suits or suspicious glances. A middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit approached us after a few minutes. "Mrs. Carter? I'm Mr. Daniels. If you'll follow me, I'll take you to your box." We followed him through a secured door and down a corridor to the vault area. The massive steel door stood open during business hours, revealing rows of metal boxes embedded in the walls. Another employee verified my identification and access code before Mr. Daniels used his key in conjunction with mine to remove box 1547. "You can use this private room," he said, placing the long metal container on a table in a small adjoining space. "Take as much time as you need. Just press the button when you're finished." When the door closed behind him, I immediately opened the box. Inside was a sealed manila envelope, a prepaid cell phone, and a thick stack of cash secured with a rubber band. I quickly counted the money, $10,000 in various denominations, before turning my attention to the envelope. The contents were sparse but significant. A formal letter from Robert to Thomas Miller at the Chicago Tribune, authorizing the release of all documents, a USB drive labeled Backup Original Documents, and a handwritten note addressed to me. "Mom, if you've made it this far, they're definitely after you. The backup USB contains the same files, plus originals I couldn't risk leaving on the first drive. Take everything to Miller immediately. He's expecting you today. The prepaid phone has one number programmed, a secure line that will reach me eventually. Use it only in absolute emergency, as it can be traced after activation. After delivering everything to Miller, take Bethany and leave Chicago. Use the cash for transportation and accommodations. Avoid planes or trains where ID is required. There's a cabin in Michigan that Dad and I used to visit. The fishing place on Cedar Lake. Remember it? The key is still hidden under the same rock by the back door. Go there and wait for my contact. I'm so sorry for putting you through this. I never intended for either of you to be involved, but when I realized how deep this went and how closely I was being watched, I had no choice. Tell Bettany I love her more than anything. Robert. I folded the note and placed it in my pocket, then gathered everything else into my handbag. Bettany watched me with curious eyes, but asked no questions, seeming to understand instinctively that this was the serious part of our game. Did you find the treasure? She whispered as I closed the empty box. We found the next clue, I replied softly. And now we need to deliver it to a special person who can help your daddy. I pressed the button to summon Mr. Daniels, using the brief waiting period to compose myself. We were halfway through Robert's trail of breadcrumbs, moving steadily toward whatever endgame he had planned. But if my years teaching history had taught me anything, it was that the most dangerous moment often comes not at the beginning of a revolution, but when its success begins to seem possible. The Chicago Tribune offices were only 15 blocks away. As we left the bank and returned to Ramon's waiting taxi, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere in the morning crowd, eyes were tracking our movement, calculating our destination, preparing to intercept us before we could deliver the evidence that would blow apart their carefully constructed criminal enterprise. Where to now, Mrs. Vasquez? Ramon asked, using Maria's surname for me as instructed. The Tribune building, please, I replied, settling Bettany beside me in the back seat. And if you notice anyone following us, please take evasive action. Ramon's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, a flash of understanding passing between us. Certainly, Senora. I know this city better than the rats know the sewers. No one will follow us for long. As we pulled away from the curb, I held Bettany's hand tightly, drawing strength from her trust in me. The next hour would determine whether Robert's dangerous gambit would succeed, or whether all three of us would become casualties of corporate corruption too powerful to challenge. Either way, there was no turning back now. Ramon proved as good as his word, executing a series of sudden turns, doubling back on one-way streets, and even briefly pulling into a hotel parking garage only to exit through a different ramp. Through it all, Bettany remained calm, treating the evasive driving as part of our adventure rather than a desperate attempt to lose potential pursuers. I think we're clear, Ramon finally announced, his eyes constantly checking his mirrors as we approached the imposing Tribune Tower. But I will circle the block after I drop you off, just to be certain. Thank you, I said, meaning it more deeply than the simple words could convey. We shouldn't be long, an hour at most. I will be waiting, Senora. Maria would never forgive me if I abandoned her favorite teacher. The Gothic architecture of the Tribune building had always impressed me during previous visits to downtown, its flying buttresses and ornate stonework reminiscent of medieval European cathedrals. Today, it represented something more immediate, potential salvation. Holding Bettany's hand firmly, I approached the security desk in the lobby, conscious of the precious cargo in my handbag. I have an appointment with Thomas Miller, I told the guard, trying to project casual confidence rather than the nervous energy thrumming through me. The guard checked a computer screen. I don't see anything scheduled. My heart sank. Had Robert's arrangements somehow fallen through? Before I could respond, the guard's phone rang. He answered, listened briefly, then looked up at me with new interest. Are you Mrs. Carter? I nodded, suddenly wary. Mr. Miller says to send you up immediately. 18th floor, suite 1823. Relief flooded through me as the guard issued temporary visitor badges and directed us to the elevator bank. Inside the elevator, Bettany looked up at me with curious eyes. Is this the person who's going to help Daddy? I hope so, sweetheart, I replied, straightening her jacket and smoothing her hair, small maternal gestures that comforted me as much as her. Remember, we need to be careful about what we say. The 18th floor housed the investigative reporting department, a maze of cubicles and glass-walled offices humming with activity. A young assistant met us at the elevator and escorted us directly to a corner office where a man in his early 40s stood waiting, his shirt sleeves rolled up and tie loosened, the universal uniform of journalists on deadline. Mrs. Carter, he said, extending his hand. Thomas Miller. I've been expecting you, though I was beginning to worry. We had to take certain precautions, I explained, shaking his hand before introducing Bethany. Miller's expression softened as he greeted my granddaughter, offering her a juice box from a small refrigerator in his office before turning back to me with renewed seriousness. Robert contacted me 3 weeks ago, he explained once we were seated, and Bethany was occupied with a pad of paper and colored pencils the assistant had provided. He said he had evidence of massive financial crimes involving Global Meridian, but needed time to compile everything and create secure backups. He leaned forward. Then he suddenly went silent 2 days ago. When my sources told me he'd boarded a plane to London yesterday, I assumed the worst, that he'd been compromised or scared off. Neither, I said, opening my handbag to extract the envelope and USB drives. He had to leave to protect himself, but he made arrangements to get everything to you through us. Miller's eyes widened as I placed the items on his desk. This is significant and potentially very dangerous for you. Did Robert explain exactly what he uncovered? Money laundering for criminal organizations, illegal weapons deals, corruption extending into regulatory agencies. I kept my voice low, despite the closed door. I saw enough to understand why people might kill to keep it hidden. He nodded grimly. Global Meridian handles billions in investments, including pension funds for several state governments and major unions. If they've been using that legitimate business as cover for criminal enterprises, he left the implications hanging. How quickly can you publish? I asked, glancing at Bethany to ensure she remained absorbed in her drawing. I'll need to verify key documents, run everything past our legal team, and get editorial approval. Miller was already examining the drives, his expression shifting from professional interest to something approaching awe as he scanned the contents. This is extraordinarily comprehensive. Robert didn't leave many loose ends. That's how he's always been, I said, a surge of maternal pride mixing with fear for my methodical, principled son. Thorough to a fault. With this level of documentation, we could publish an initial story online by tomorrow. Print edition the following day. He looked up from his computer. But you and your granddaughter shouldn't be anywhere near Chicago when that happens. These people will be desperate once they realize what's coming. We're leaving as soon as we finish here, I assured him. Robert suggested a location where we can lay low until things settle. Miller nodded, then hesitated. Mrs. Carter, I've been investigating corporate corruption for 15 years. What your son has uncovered here isn't just unusual, it's unprecedented in its scope and the level of detail he managed to document. When this story breaks, it will trigger investigations in multiple countries, stock market chaos, probably congressional hearings. He trailed off, seemingly overwhelmed by the implications. Will it be enough? I asked, the teacher in me needing to know that this risk, to my son, to Bethany, to our safety and future, would accomplish its purpose. Will they be held accountable? Some will. The highest profile executives, certainly. Some of the government officials implicated. His expression turned realistic, rather than reassuring. But systems this corrupt have self-preservation mechanisms. Some people will escape consequences. That's just the reality. I absorbed this with a nod, having taught enough history to understand how power protects itself. As long as it stops the worst of it, the weapons deals, the money laundering for terrorists, that has to end. It will, Miller promised. This story will make that inevitable. A knock at the door interrupted us. Miller's assistant poked her head in, her expression tense. There are 2 men in the lobby asking for security clearance to come up. They claim to be federal agents investigating financial crimes, but something seems off. Security is stalling them, but they're being insistent. Miller's reaction was immediate. We need to move you now. Is there anything else Robert wanted me to know? I shook my head, gathering my belongings while Miller quickly copied the drive's contents to his secure server. There's a service elevator that leads to the loading dock, he explained, returning the original drives to me. My assistant will take you down. I'll handle our visitors and buy you time. He crouched briefly to Bethany's level. It was very nice meeting you, young lady. You and your grandmother are doing something very brave and important today. Bethany smiled shyly. My daddy says sometimes you have to be brave even when you're scared. Your daddy is a wise man, Miller replied, a flicker of emotion crossing his face before he turned back to me. Go now. I'll contact you through the secure channel Robert established once the story is published. The assistant led us through a maze of hallways to a freight elevator tucked at the back of the floor. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of two men in dark suits stepping off the main elevator, their expressions grim and purposeful. We had escaped by mere moments. The loading dock buzzed with activity. Delivery trucks arriving with paper supplies, cafeteria deliveries, mailroom staff sorting packages. We slipped through the organized chaos unnoticed, emerging onto a side street away from the main entrance. Ramon's taxi waited exactly where he had promised, 2 blocks south. As we hurried toward it, I fought the urge to look over my shoulder, knowing that appearing nervous would only draw attention we couldn't afford. "Did you finish your treasure hunt, little one?" Ramon asked as we settled into the back seat. "Not yet," Bettany replied seriously. "We have one more place to go." "Then let us go there," he said, pulling smoothly into traffic. "Where to, Senora?" I hesitated only briefly. "We need to leave the city. Head north toward Wisconsin. I'll direct you as we go." As Chicago's skyline receded in the rear window, I pulled Bettany close, allowing myself a moment of cautious optimism. We had completed Robert's mission. The evidence was in capable hands, soon to be public knowledge that couldn't be buried or denied. Now we just needed to disappear until the storm passed. "Grandma," Bettany whispered against my side, "are we winning our game?" I stroked her hair, measuring my response carefully. "We're doing very well, sweetheart, very well indeed." What I didn't tell her was that in games like this one, games where powerful people stood to lose everything, the most dangerous moment often comes right before victory. We had landed a blow against our opponents, but they were far from defeated, and like wounded predators, they would be at their most dangerous now. The Illinois countryside unfolded beyond our windows as Ramon's taxi left the suburban sprawl behind. Familiar landscapes transformed into foreign territory through the lens of our new reality. Every police car a potential threat, every black SUV a possible pursuer. I directed Ramon to avoid major highways, choosing instead the network of state and county roads that would make our journey longer but less predictable. "We should stop soon," I told him after we'd been driving for nearly 2 hours. "You've done more than enough, and I don't want to take you too far from your regular work." Ramon shook his head firmly. "Maria told me to help you, however needed. Besides, I have my nephew covering my shifts today. Where exactly are we going?" I hesitated, balancing trust against caution. "A cabin in northern Michigan, near Cedar Lake." "Michigan is far, Senora. At least 6 more hours, especially on these back roads." "I know. We'll find another way from here." I glanced at Bettany, who had fallen asleep against my side, emotionally exhausted from our morning's adventures. "Perhaps a bus, or—" "I have a better idea," Ramon interrupted, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "My brother-in-law runs a small trucking company. They have a delivery going to Traverse City today. The driver is my cousin Eduardo. He could take you most of the way." The offer was tempting. Truckers moved across state lines with minimal scrutiny, and the randomness of connecting with a vehicle already making the journey would be nearly impossible for pursuers to anticipate. Yet I hesitated, reluctant to involve more people in our dangerous situation. Ramon seemed to read my thoughts. "Eduardo asks no questions. He has made many such special deliveries for family and friends needing to travel quietly." I didn't press for details. The immigrant community had its own reasons for sometimes needing to move people discreetly, reasons I had come to understand and respect during my years working with Maria and her extended family. "If you're sure he wouldn't mind," I said finally. Ramon made a call in rapid Spanish, too quick for my limited vocabulary to follow. After a brief conversation, he nodded with satisfaction. "It is arranged. Eduardo will meet us at a truck stop near Rockford in 1 hour. He delivers furniture to stores in northern Michigan. You and the little one can ride in the cab with him. Very comfortable, very safe." I squeezed his shoulder in gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you and Maria properly." "You helped Maria's daughter get a college scholarship years ago," he replied simply. "In our family, we do not forget such kindnesses." The truck stop buzzed with the rhythms of highway commerce. Big rigs refueling, drivers grabbing meals and coffee, travelers stretching their legs. I used some of Robert's cash to buy supplies, sandwiches, drinks, snacks for the journey ahead, plus a small backpack, basic toiletries, and a coloring book with crayons for Bettany. Eduardo's truck was exactly as promised, a large commercial vehicle transporting furniture to retailers across Michigan. The driver himself was a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper beard and gentle eyes that crinkled when he smiled at Bettany. Ramon says you need to reach Cedar Lake, he said after brief introductions. I deliver in Traverse City, about 45 minutes south of there. Close enough, yes? Perfect, I agreed, relieved beyond measure. And you're sure we're not imposing? Eduardo waved away my concern. The company pays for the fuel no matter what. Having passengers makes the journey less lonely. He grinned at Bettany. Especially passengers who might enjoy hearing truck driver stories. After tearful thanks and promises to let Maria know when we were safe, we parted ways with Ramon. Eduardo helped us into the surprisingly spacious cab of his truck, showing Bettany the elevated sleeping compartment behind the seats that delighted her with its compact efficiency. Like a little house on wheels, she exclaimed, bouncing slightly on the narrow bunk. As the massive truck rumbled onto the highway, I felt some of the tension ease from my shoulders. We were moving further from danger with each mile, hidden within the anonymous flow of commercial traffic crisscrossing the country. For the first time since hearing Bettany's whispered warning at the airport, I allowed myself to take a full, deep breath. Eduardo proved a considerate companion, entertaining Bettany with carefully edited tales from his 20 years on the road, while giving me space to process our situation. When he noticed my fatigue, he insisted I rest in the sleeping compartment while he and Bettany continued their conversation in the front seats. I must have fallen into a deeper sleep than intended, because when I woke, the quality of light had changed dramatically. Golden afternoon sunshine slanted through the windows, and the landscape outside had transformed from Illinois farmland to the denser forests of Michigan. Almost to Traverse City, Eduardo informed me as I rejoined them. Another hour, perhaps. Bettany was coloring contentedly, her previous fear seemingly forgotten in the adventure of riding in a big truck. I checked the prepaid phone from the safety deposit box, still no messages, which was both reassuring and concerning. Had Robert reached London safely? Was he still in danger? Can I ask a favor? I said to Eduardo. Could you perhaps find a news station on the radio? I need to check if there's any relevant information. He nodded knowingly, tuning the radio to a news channel where a broadcaster was mid-sentence, stock plunging amid rumors of a major investigative report set to be published tomorrow. Global Meridian Investments has issued a statement denying any impropriety and calling the rumors baseless attacks designed to manipulate markets. Trading was temporarily halted after shares dropped 20% in afternoon trading. Financial analysts are speculating about... Eduardo changed the station at my request, but the damage was done. Word was already leaking. The Tribune must have begun reaching out to Global Meridian for comment, setting the standard journalistic practice of allowing subjects to respond before publication. It also meant our pursuers now knew exactly what was coming. Bad news? Eduardo asked quietly, his eyes flicking meaningfully toward Bettany to indicate he wouldn't speak plainly in front of her. Complicated news, I replied, but it confirms we need to reach our destination as quickly as possible. He nodded, pressing the accelerator slightly. I know some shortcuts. The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows when Eduardo finally pulled his truck into a small roadside diner about 30 miles north of Traverse City. This is as far as my route allows, he explained apologetically. But the owner here, Maggie, she can help. Her son drives a logging truck up near Cedar Lake. More connections, more strangers' kindness. It was as if Robert's trail of breadcrumbs had been supplemented by an unexpected network of support, materializing when we needed it most. Maggie proved to be a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who asked few questions after Eduardo's brief, private explanation. Within an hour, her son Derek had arrived in his pickup truck, ready to drive us the final leg to Cedar Lake. As we thanked Eduardo and prepared to transfer to Derek's vehicle, Bettany suddenly wrapped her arms around the truck driver's massive leg. "Thank you for the stories," she said solemnly, "and for helping us with our game." Eduardo knelt to her level, his weathered face gentle. "You are very welcome, little one. You be good for your abuela. Yes, she is very brave." The simple words caught in my chest, not because they were particularly profound, but because they reflected how completely our reality had shifted. 2 days ago, I had been a retired teacher looking forward to a quiet week with my granddaughter while my son traveled for business. Now strangers were calling me brave as they helped us flee from dangerous men. As Derek's pickup rumbled north toward Cedar Lake and Robert's promised sanctuary, I wondered if I was, in fact, brave, or simply a grandmother with no other choice but to keep moving forward one step at a time toward whatever awaited us at the end of this increasingly dangerous road. Cedar Lake materialized from the gathering dusk like a memory taking physical form, a smooth expanse of water reflecting the deepening blue of the evening sky, surrounded by dense pine forests that had been my husband James's sanctuary for decades before his death. The small log cabin that had served as base camp for countless father-son fishing expeditions stood on a gentle rise overlooking the water, its windows dark and shuttered. Derek pulled his truck to a stop at the end of the rutted dirt road, about 50 yards from the cabin. "This is as close as I can get," he explained. "Road washes out every spring and no one's bothered to improve it." "This is perfect," I assured him, gathering our meager supplies. "You've been incredibly kind." He shrugged off my thanks with the casual modesty I was coming to associate with this impromptu underground railroad that had carried us from Chicago to northern Michigan. "Mom wouldn't have it any other way. You need anything while you're up here, there's a radio in the cabin. Channel 3 reaches our house if reception's good." He hesitated, then added, "Whatever trouble you're in, ma'am, I hope it passes soon." I nodded my appreciation, helping a sleepy Bettany from the truck. We watched Derek's taillights disappear down the narrow road before turning toward the cabin that would be our refuge for, how long? Days? Weeks? Robert's instructions hadn't specified, and I realized with a slight chill that we were now truly on our own, cut off from both pursuers and allies. "Is this where Daddy and Grandpa used to fish?" Bettany asked, suddenly more alert as she took in our surroundings. "Yes, sweetheart. They came here every summer when your dad was about your age. Did you come too?" I shook my head, a bittersweet smile forming. "No, this was their special place, just for them. I only came once to help your grandpa close it up for winter the year before he died. That had been nearly 15 years ago, yet I remembered exactly where James had hidden the spare key, beneath a distinctive red-streaked rock beside the back porch steps. Remarkably, it was still there, exactly as Robert had promised in his note. The cabin's interior was simple but well-maintained. A main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen area, 2 bedrooms, and a basic bathroom with a shower that pulled water from the lake. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise it appeared that someone, likely Robert, had ensured the place remained in good repair over the years. "It smells like pine trees inside, too," Bettany observed as I lit the propane lamps, their warm glow creating dancing shadows on the log walls. "Your grandfather loved the smell of pine," I told her, grateful for the distraction of practical tasks, checking the propane tank, starting the generator for electricity, finding linens for the beds. He said it cleared his mind better than any medicine. Working together, we soon had the cabin reasonably comfortable. I located the promised radio and tested it briefly, receiving only static, but confirming it had power. The kitchen cupboards contained basics, canned goods, pasta, rice, supplemented by the supplies we'd purchased at the truck stop. We would need to venture out for fresh food eventually, but not immediately. Once Bettany was fed, bathed, and tucked into one of the narrow beds in the smaller bedroom, I allowed myself to truly consider our situation for the first time. The prepaid phone from the safety deposit box remained silent. No emergency contact from Robert. The cabin had no television or internet connection, leaving us completely isolated from news about either the Tribune's exposé or its fallout. I found myself standing at the window overlooking the lake, watching moonlight ripple across its surface, trying to quiet the questions circling in my mind. Had Thomas Miller successfully published the story? Had Global Meridian figured out who had delivered their secrets to the press? Was Robert safe in London? Or had their reach extended across oceans? My reflection in the glass startled me. A tired-looking woman with silver hair and worried eyes, so different from the confident teacher who had accompanied her son and granddaughter to the airport just 36 hours earlier. That woman had lived in a world of lesson plans and book clubs, grocery lists and birthday cards. This woman existed in a shadow realm of coded messages and safe houses, pursued by nameless threats. A soft sound behind me broke my reverie. Bettany padding into the main room in her borrowed pajamas, Mr. Carrots clutched to her chest. "I can't sleep," she said simply. "The bed feels funny." I opened my arms and she came to me without hesitation, her small body warm against mine as I lifted her onto my lap in the old rocking chair beside the fireplace. "It's a new place," I acknowledged. "It takes time to get used to new places. When is Daddy coming back?" The question held no whine or complaint, just a child's straightforward desire to understand. I chose my words carefully. "As soon as he finishes his important work." He's counting on us to be brave and patient while he's gone. Is he fighting bad guys? Like in my books? The simple question captured the essence of our situation with unexpected clarity. In a way, yes. Your dad discovered that some people at his company were doing very wrong things that hurt others. He's making sure they can't keep doing those things. Bettany nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. That's why the men at the airport wanted to stop us. Because we had Daddy's secret evidence. I shouldn't have been surprised by her comprehension. Children absorb far more than adults often credit. But her matter-of-fact summary still caught me off guard. Yes, I admitted. But we did exactly what your father asked us to do. We got the evidence to the right person, and now everyone will know the truth. And then we can go home? The innocent question pierced my heart. I had no idea if we would ever return to our previous lives, if the exposure of Global Meridian's crimes would ensure our safety or mark us permanently as targets. The truth was, I didn't know what home would look like after this. We'll be with your dad again, I promised instead. That's what matters most. She accepted this, her eyelids growing heavy as I rocked gently back and forth. Within minutes she had drifted back to sleep, her breathing deep and even, face peaceful in the lamplight. I continued rocking, reluctant to disturb her rest by moving her back to bed. Outside, an owl called across the lake, a haunting sound that seemed to echo the uncertainty of our future. Yet in that moment, with Bettany's trusting weight against me, I felt an unexpected clarity of purpose. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or dangers we still faced, I would protect this child. Not just because she was my granddaughter, or because Robert had entrusted her to my care, but because in a world where powerful people could casually authorize weapons deals that would kill thousands or launder money for terrorists, protecting innocence and truth became an act of defiance. I had spent decades teaching students about historical moments when ordinary people faced extraordinary choices. Now, in the quiet of a remote cabin with a sleeping child in my arms, I realized I had become one of those people, thrust by circumstance into a moment that would define not just my life, but potentially many others. The thought was terrifying, and somehow, strangely empowering. Morning arrived with startling beauty, sunlight filtering through pine boughs, casting dappled patterns across the cabin floor, while birdsong filled the air outside. For a disorienting moment, I could almost believe we were simply on vacation, that Robert would emerge from the second bedroom, yawning and asking about breakfast, that our greatest concern would be whether the fish were biting today. Reality reasserted itself when I checked the prepaid phone, still no messages, and automatically scanned the tree line for any sign of unexpected movement. Old habits from a mere 2 days of life on the run, already ingrained as if I'd lived this way for years. Bettany, however, embraced our new environment with the adaptability of childhood. After a breakfast of oatmeal and canned peaches, she explored the cabin with delight, discovering fishing tackle in a closet, board games with missing pieces under a bed, and a collection of field guides to local wildlife that captured her immediate interest. "Grandma, can we go looking for birds?" she asked, showing me detailed illustrations of chickadees and nuthatches. "The book says there are lots here." I hesitated, torn between caution and the need to maintain some semblance of normalcy for her sake. The cabin was isolated, the nearest neighbor at least a mile away according to my memory of James's descriptions. Surely a short walk along the lakeshore would be safe enough. "We'll stay close to the cabin," I decided, helping her into her jacket. "And if I say we need to go back, we go immediately. No questions." She nodded solemnly, accepting these terms with the seriousness of our ongoing game. Together we ventured outside, keeping to the tree line where we could quickly retreat to cover if necessary. The spring air carried a lingering chill, but sunshine warmed our faces as we walked slowly along the shore, Bettany clutching her bird guide and pointing excitedly at each flutter of wings. I found myself simultaneously hyper-vigilant and oddly at peace, scanning constantly for threats while absorbing the simple joy of watching my granddaughter discover something new. Was this how mothers in war zones felt during brief moments of normalcy? This dissonant blend of danger and domestic tranquility? We had identified 7 different bird species and collected an assortment of interesting rocks when the distant sound of a vehicle engine sent ice through my veins. I grabbed Bettany's hand, pulling her toward the trees. "Inside. Now," I whispered, all senses suddenly heightened. We hurried back to the cabin, entering through the rear door and securing it behind us. I positioned Bettany in the smaller bedroom, away from windows. "Stay here until I come get you," I instructed, keeping my voice calm despite the pounding of my heart. "Remember how we practiced being very quiet?" She nodded, clutching Mr. Carrots tightly, her eyes wide but trusting. I moved silently to the front window, positioning myself to see without being seen. A pickup truck, older model, rusted around the wheel wells, had stopped at the end of the dirt road. A single figure emerged, an older man in flannel and work boots, carrying what appeared to be a paper grocery bag. Relief flooded through me as I recognized Derek's description of his father, the property caretaker who checked on the cabin periodically. Still, I maintained caution, watching as he approached and knocked firmly on the front door. "Mrs. Carter?" he called. "It's Jim Lawson. Derek sent me with some supplies." I retrieved Bettany before answering, unwilling to let her out of my sight even for a moment. Together, we opened the door to find a weathered man in his 70s with kind eyes and a face creased from decades of outdoor work. "Didn't mean to startle you folks," he said, holding out the grocery bag. "Derek mentioned you might need some fresh things. Milk, eggs, bread. My wife sent along a casserole, too." "That's incredibly thoughtful," I said, accepting the bag gratefully. "Please thank her for us." Jim nodded, his eyes taking in the cabin with professional assessment. "Place holding up okay? Haven't been up to check it much this past winter." "It's perfect," I assured him. "Your maintenance has kept it in wonderful condition." He seemed pleased by this, then hesitated before adding, "Don't mean to pry, ma'am, but Derek mentioned you might be in some kind of trouble. Anything we should be watching for? Strangers asking questions, that sort of thing?" The direct question caught me off guard, but his straightforward manner suggested genuine concern rather than prying curiosity. "It's complicated," I admitted. "But yes, there might be people looking for us. If anyone asks, nobody's seen you," he finished with a knowing nod. "That's what I figured. Folks around here mind their own business, but we look out for each other too." He glanced at Bettany, who was half hidden behind my legs. "You two sit tight. I'll swing by every couple days with supplies. Anything specific you need, just leave a note under that flower pot on the porch." After he departed, I found myself unexpectedly moved by this continued chain of kindnesses from strangers, each person doing their small part without demanding explanations or passing judgment. It stood in stark contrast to the corporate criminals Robert had exposed, whose massive resources and connections were being used to protect their ability to profit from suffering. The day passed slowly, marked by simple activities to keep Bettany engaged, board games, reading from the cabin's small collection of paperbacks, identifying more birds through the windows. I rationed our use of the generator to preserve fuel, relying instead on natural light and propane lamps as evening approached. After dinner, I tried the radio again, this time successfully connecting to the frequency Derek had mentioned. His voice crackled through the static, confirming that his father had made contact and asking if we needed anything else. I requested newspapers, any national publications they could find, and he promised to send them with the next supply delivery. Night fell, bringing with it a profound silence unlike anything in our suburban life. I put Bettany to bed with another story about her father's childhood fishing adventures at this very lake, then settled into the rocking chair with a kerosene lamp, one of James's old mystery novels open in my lap, though my eyes rarely focused on the words. Around midnight, the prepaid phone finally chirped, a single text message from an unlisted number. Story published. Global Meridian stock suspended. FBI raided headquarters. Stay put. Contact coming in 3 days. All safe for now. The terse message told me nothing about Robert's personal safety, but confirmed our mission had succeeded. Thomas Miller had published the exposé, and the wheels of justice, however imperfect, had begun to turn. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction before the implications of contact coming in 3 days registered. Someone would be arriving at the cabin. Someone Robert trusted enough to send to us. 3 more days of waiting, of jumping at every sound, of maintaining a brave face for Bettany, while my own anxiety simmered beneath the surface. 3 more days before we would learn what came next in this unexpected chapter of our lives. I checked all doors and windows one final time before attempting sleep, the loaded rifle I'd found in the cabin's closet now propped beside my bed. James had taught me to shoot decades ago, a skill I'd never imagined needing until now. As I drifted toward uneasy sleep, I found myself cataloging the changes in myself since that moment at the airport. The Helena Carter who had arrived at this cabin was not the same woman who had heard her granddaughter's whispered warning. That woman had lived a life defined by predictable routines and reasonable expectations. This woman, the one lying awake with a rifle within reach, had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed: decisiveness under pressure, strategic thinking, the ability to navigate danger while protecting what mattered most. Whether these changes were improvements or simply necessary adaptations to extraordinary circumstances remained to be seen. But as I finally succumbed to exhaustion, one certainty remained. I was no longer merely reacting to events beyond my control. I was becoming an active participant in whatever story was still unfolding, for better or worse. The newspapers arrived the following day, delivered by Jim along with more supplies and a battery-powered radio. The headlines confirmed what the text message had suggested. Global Meridian implicated in massive financial crimes dominated the front pages, accompanied by photos of FBI agents carrying boxes from the company's Chicago headquarters. Thomas Miller's byline appeared prominently, his carefully crafted exposé laying out the evidence Robert had gathered with devastating precision. The article detailed money laundering operations for drug cartels and terrorist organizations, illegal weapons deals that violated international sanctions, and systematic bribery of regulatory officials. Several high-ranking executives had already been arrested, while others, including the CEO, were reportedly cooperating with federal authorities in exchange for leniency. "Is that Daddy's company?" Bettany asked, peering over my shoulder at the newspaper spread across the kitchen table. "Yes," I answered, quickly folding the paper to hide the more disturbing details. "Your father helped the reporters understand some very complicated things that were happening there." She nodded, accepting this simplified explanation. "That's why we're having our adventure, so the bad guys couldn't stop him." "Exactly," I confirmed, once again impressed by her perception. "And it worked. Your dad's evidence is helping a lot of people now." The days passed with agonizing slowness, our isolation both protection and prison. I maintained a routine for Bettany's sake: meals at regular times, nature walks staying close to the cabin, reading and games in the evenings. The battery radio brought news updates that I listened to after she was asleep, absorbing the growing scandal as Global Meridian's crimes captured national attention. Congressional hearings were being scheduled. International arrest warrants had been issued for executives who had fled the country. Client funds were frozen pending investigation. Yet nowhere in the coverage was there any mention of Robert Sullivan, the whistleblower who had made it all possible, a deliberate omission, I assumed, to protect him from retaliation. On the morning of the third day, I woke before dawn, tension coiling through me at the prospect of our expected visitor. Who would Robert send? How would they find us? What news would they bring? I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would allow for quick movement if necessary, and positioned myself on the porch with a cup of coffee and James's old binoculars. Bettany still slept peacefully inside, unaware of the significance of this particular day. The sun had just cleared the tree line when I spotted movement on the dirt road. Not a vehicle, but a single figure on foot, approaching steadily. I retrieved the rifle from inside the door, keeping it visible but not directly aimed as the visitor drew closer. The morning mist partially obscured their features, but I could make out a woman of medium height, carrying a backpack, dressed for hiking in practical boots and layers. As she came within 50 yards, recognition hit me like a physical blow. Rachel Sullivan, Robert's ex-wife and Bettany's mother. I lowered the rifle immediately, shock and confusion warring within me. Rachel had moved to California after the divorce 2 years ago, establishing a new life that included minimal involvement with her daughter. Monthly video calls and holiday visits constituted the extent of her parenting, with primary custody granted to Robert and me serving as secondary caregiver when his work required travel. "Helena?" she called, raising a hand in greeting as she approached the porch. "It's just me." I set the rifle aside, moving to meet her at the bottom of the steps. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her normally immaculate appearance rumpled from travel. "Rachel," I responded, still processing her unexpected arrival. "How did you—" "Robert arranged everything," she interrupted, dropping her backpack to the ground. "He contacted me 5 days ago, explained what was happening. I've been traveling under a false name, using cash only, changing transportation methods every few hours." A humorless laugh escaped her. Apparently those crime novels he always read came in handy for planning fugitive logistics. Before I could respond, the cabin door flew open and Bettany burst onto the porch, her face transforming with disbelieving joy. "Mommy?" she cried, practically tumbling down the steps in her haste. Rachel knelt, opening her arms as Bettany crashed into her embrace. "Hey, Bug," she said, using the nickname she'd given her daughter as an infant. "I've missed you so much." I stepped back, giving them space for their reunion while trying to realign my understanding of our situation. Rachel's presence changed everything, raised new questions, created new possibilities and complications. After the emotional greeting subsided, we moved inside where Rachel accepted coffee and began filling in the considerable gaps in my understanding. "Robert contacted me through an old email account we kept for emergencies," she explained, warming her hands on the mug. "He knew they'd be monitoring his usual communications, but this address was from before we were married. No connection to his current identity." "He told you everything?" I asked, still processing the implications. She nodded. "About the money laundering, the weapons deals, all of it. He said he couldn't warn you directly because they were watching him too closely, but he knew you'd protect Bettany if he gave her the right instructions." A flicker of something, regret, shame, crossed her face. "He trusted you completely, Helena. Said you were the strongest person he knew." Bettany had settled against her mother's side, clearly unwilling to break physical contact after their long separation. I sent her to wash up and change clothes, needing a moment to speak with Rachel privately. "Where is he now?" I asked, once Bettany was out of earshot. "Is he safe?" Rachel glanced toward the hallway before lowering her voice. "He never went to London. The ticket was a diversion. He's been in Canada, working with international authorities to track the offshore accounts." She hesitated, then continued. "The reason he sent me here is, we need to move. All of us. Tonight." The calm I'd cultivated over the past days shattered instantly. "Why? What's happened?" "The investigation is revealing connections beyond what even Robert anticipated. Government officials, intelligence agencies, foreign interests, all compromised. Some very powerful people are facing prison or worse, and they've traced the leak back to Robert." Her eyes met mine, fear evident despite her controlled tone. "They've identified his family as leverage. There was an incident at my apartment in California. Men broke in, ransacked the place. Robert's contact in the FBI says they're narrowing the search, focusing on properties with family connections." Cold dread settled in my stomach. "This cabin is registered to James's estate," she confirmed grimly. "It's only a matter of time before they find it in property records. Robert says we have to leave tonight, meet his contact at the Canadian border. They have new identities prepared, a place for us to stay until the immediate danger passes." The magnitude of what she was describing, abandoning our entire lives, possibly permanently, struck me with physical force. I sank into a chair, trying to process this new reality. "How long?" I managed finally. "How long until we can come back?" Rachel's expression softened with sympathy. "Robert doesn't know. Months at minimum, possibly longer." The unspoken, possibly never, hung in the air between us. I thought of my home filled with decades of memories, my friends, the community I'd built over a lifetime, all of it potentially lost because my son had chosen to expose corruption at the highest levels. "I know it's overwhelming," Rachel said quietly, "but we don't have a choice, Helena. These people have reached the desperate stage where they have nothing left to lose. If they can't silence Robert directly, they'll use us to force his hand." I looked toward the hallway where Bettany's happy humming drifted from the bathroom, blissfully unaware that her world was about to be upended yet again. "Then we leave tonight," I said, my resolve hardening around the one certainty that remained constant through all these changes. Protecting my family came before everything else. "Tell me what we need to do." Dusk settled over Cedar Lake as we made our final preparations. Rachel's instructions were precise. Take only what we could carry in backpacks, dress in layers, bring the minimum identification necessary. Everything else would be left behind. The cabin itself would be made to look temporarily abandoned rather than hastily fled, buying us precious time if our pursuers tracked us this far. I moved through the small rooms with bittersweet efficiency, erasing traces of our presence while preserving the illusion that we might return any day. Beds were left rumpled, but not stripped. Dishes were washed, but left in the drying rack. Fishing gear was positioned near the door as if ready for tomorrow's expedition. "Grandma, why do we have to leave at night?" Bettany asked as I helped her pack her few belongings. "Isn't it harder to see?" "That's exactly why," I explained, folding her extra sweater into a compact bundle. "Sometimes it's safer when people can't see you clearly." She nodded, accepting this logic, like hide and seek in the dark. "Very much like that," I agreed, grateful for her ability to frame our desperate flight as another phase of our ongoing game. Rachel entered with an armful of food items packed into Ziploc bags. "The contact says to bring provisions for 24 hours. We'll have about a 6-hour hike to reach the rendezvous point." 6 hours? Through the forest at night? I couldn't keep the concern from my voice. With a 7-year-old? "Robert planned the route carefully," she assured me. "It follows game trails most of the way, avoids major elevation changes, and keeps to terrain that's manageable even in low light. He used to hunt in these woods with his father, remember?" I did remember. James and Robert disappearing for weekends during deer season, returning with detailed stories of their woodland adventures regardless of whether they'd actually caught anything. Those expeditions had given my son an intimate knowledge of the backcountry that now might save our lives. "The alternative is driving," Rachel continued, "which means roads, checkpoints, potential witnesses. The Canadian border is surprisingly porous in these remote areas if you know where to cross on foot." The casual way she referenced illegal border crossing highlighted how completely our world had shifted. 3 weeks ago, I would have been appalled at the suggestion. Now it seemed not just reasonable, but necessary. By 10 o'clock, darkness had fully claimed the forest. We doused all lights in the cabin and waited another hour to ensure our night vision was fully adjusted before beginning our journey. Bettany, initially excited by the prospect of a night adventure, had grown quieter as the reality of leaving the cabin's safety set in. "Will we ever come back here?" she asked as I adjusted her small backpack over her shoulders. The question pierced me with its simple directness. I considered offering reassurance, then decided on honesty instead. "I don't know, sweetheart, but what matters most is that we're together. You, me, and your mom. Places can be left behind, but people are what make a real home." She absorbed this with characteristic seriousness, then reached for my hand. "I'm ready." Rachel led the way, navigating with a red-filtered headlamp that preserved our night vision while providing just enough illumination to follow the narrow trail. I took the rear position, with Bettany between us. The forest enveloped us immediately, a dense world of sounds and scents accentuated by the darkness. Owls called overhead, small creatures rustled in the underbrush, and the sweet, resinous scent of pine surrounded us like nature's perfume. We moved slowly but steadily, stopping every 30 minutes for brief rests and water. Bettany maintained an impressive pace for her age, though I could see fatigue beginning to show after the second hour. Without complaint, Rachel lifted her onto her back for stretches of the journey, mother and daughter working together with a synchronicity that belied their typically distant relationship. Near the halfway point, Rachel called a longer break beside a small stream. As Bettany dozed against my shoulder, Rachel and I shared a moment of unexpected connection. "I've been a terrible mother," she said quietly, staring into the darkness beyond our small circle of filtered light. "Pursuing my career in California while Robert raised our daughter. You made choices that seemed right at the time," I replied, surprised by her sudden vulnerability. She shook her head. "I abandoned them. Let's call it what it was." Her voice carried no self-pity, just stark assessment. I told myself Bettany was better off with Robert. He was always the more natural parent, that I was building a better future by establishing my practice. That weekly video calls were enough. A bitter laugh escaped her. "Now look at us. No careers, no homes, running for our lives because Robert had the courage to do the right thing when I was busy building my perfect life 3,000 miles away." I considered her words carefully before responding. "We all have regrets, Rachel, but right now, you're here when it matters most. That counts for something." "Does it?" she asked, genuine uncertainty in her voice. "Can you repair years of absence in a crisis?" "You'd be surprised what crisis reveals about relationships," I offered. "When everything else is stripped away, the core either holds or it doesn't." Our conversation ended as Bettany stirred, and we resumed our journey with renewed purpose. The night deepened around us, the forest growing denser as we moved further from established trails. Twice Rachel paused to consult a hand-drawn map, making slight adjustments to our course. Near dawn, we reached a small clearing where the trees thinned enough to reveal the first hints of approaching daylight. Rachel checked her watch and nodded with satisfaction. We're making good time. The rendezvous point is about 40 minutes ahead, a small hunting cabin just south of the border. From there, our contact will guide us across and to transportation on the Canadian side. Who is this contact? I asked, the question that had been bothering me for hours finally surfacing. How can Robert be certain they're trustworthy? He wouldn't tell me, said it was safer if I didn't know until we met them. She adjusted her pack, grimacing slightly at the weight. But he was confident, said it was someone from his past that he trusted with his life. And ours. We pushed forward as the forest gradually brightened around us, birds awakening to greet the new day with chorus. Bethany, initially energized by the approaching dawn, began to flag noticeably. I carried her for the final stretch, her small body heavy against my back, but her trust a greater weight on my heart. The hunting cabin appeared suddenly, a crude, one-room structure nearly reclaimed by the surrounding vegetation. No smoke rose from its chimney, no light shone from its single window, but Rachel approached with confidence. "Hello," she called softly, rapping lightly on the weathered door. "We're the Sullivan family." Silence answered, stretching uncomfortably until I began to wonder if we'd somehow missed our connection. Then the door creaked open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the dim interior. "Right on time," a woman's voice observed, stepping into the morning light. "Robert said you'd be punctual." Recognition hit me with the force of a physical blow. The woman, slim, athletic, with gray-streaked dark hair cropped short, had aged 2 decades since I'd last seen her, but her identity was unmistakable. "Diane?" I whispered, nearly stumbling in shock. Diane Matthews, Robert's college girlfriend, who had abruptly disappeared from his life during their senior year after being recruited by an unnamed government agency. The relationship that had broken my son's heart and set him on a completely different life path than he'd planned. "Hello, Helena," she replied with a slight smile. "It's been a long time." "You know each other?" Rachel asked, confusion evident in her voice. "We did, once," Diane confirmed, gesturing us inside. "A lifetime ago, before I became someone else entirely." As we entered the cabin, I struggled to integrate this new piece into the already complex puzzle of our situation. Robert's cryptic message about someone from his past took on new significance. Had he maintained contact with Diane all these years? Or had their paths crossed again through the twisted connections of Global Meridian's corruption? The cabin's interior was Spartan, but prepared for our arrival. Bottled water, energy bars, a first aid kit, and most surprisingly, a satellite phone that looked significantly more advanced than civilian technology. "We don't have much time," Diane said, all business now as she checked her watch. "Border Patrol changes shifts in 90 minutes. That's our window to cross undetected." Bethany, observing this new development with wide eyes, tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, who is she?" I knelt to her level, finding simple words for a complicated situation. "Someone who knew your daddy a long time ago. Someone who's going to help us find him." "That's right," Diane confirmed, softening her tone as she addressed Bethany directly. "Your dad and I were good friends once, and now I'm going to make sure you all get somewhere safe." As she outlined the next phase of our journey, a 2-mile hike to the border, crossing at a specific unmanned section, then another mile to a waiting vehicle, I found myself wondering what other surprises awaited us on this extraordinary path we'd been forced to travel. From a whispered warning in an airport to an international escape coordinated by a long-lost girlfriend turned covert operative, nothing in my 68 years had prepared me for any of this. Yet here I stood, ready to follow this ghost from my son's past into yet another unknown. Because when protecting family, there is no map too complex, no journey too daunting, no ally too unexpected. The border crossing proceeded with practiced efficiency. Diane guided us along game trails so faint they were nearly invisible, her movements betraying years of fieldcraft that I could only imagine. We maintained silence except for essential communication, with Bethany, understanding the gravity of our situation despite her age, following instructions without question. "See that line of rocks?" Diane whispered, pointing to an unremarkable arrangement of stones that seemed natural to my untrained eye. "That's the border. Once we cross, we're in Canada. Different jurisdiction, different pursuers. Gives us an advantage, at least temporarily." "Will they follow us?" Rachel asked, adjusting Bettany's hood against the morning chill. Eventually, Diane confirmed, but international coordination takes time, even for organizations with their resources. That delay is what we're counting on. We crossed the invisible line between nations with no ceremony, no acknowledgement beyond Diane's brief nod of satisfaction. The forest on the Canadian side looked identical, the same pines, the same underbrush, the same birdsong, yet knowing we had left American soil created a psychological shift I couldn't quite articulate. Another hour of hiking brought us to a narrow dirt road where a nondescript SUV waited, partially concealed by overhanging branches. A man leaned against the vehicle, straightening as we approached. Diane raised her hand in greeting, and he responded with a casual salute that suggested military background. "This is Marcus," Diane introduced briefly. "He'll drive the first leg. No questions, please." Marcus nodded to us without speaking, helping load our backpacks into the vehicle before holding the door as we climbed in. Bettany, exhausted from our night journey, fell asleep almost immediately against Rachel's side. I found myself fighting similar fatigue, the adrenaline that had sustained me finally ebbing now that we had reached this milestone. "You should rest," Diane advised from the front passenger seat as Marcus drove smoothly along back roads, avoiding main highways. "It's another 6 hours to the safe house." "Where are we going?" I asked, needing some anchor in this sea of uncertainty. "A property outside Montreal, remote, secure, off official records." She turned slightly, meeting my eyes. "Robert is waiting there." The simple statement jolted me fully awake. "Robert's in Montreal. I thought—" "We maintained that fiction deliberately," Diane explained. "Even with Rachel, the fewer people who knew his actual location, the safer for everyone." Rachel stirred beside me. "You lied to me?" "Robert lied to you," Diane corrected without apology. "Operational security. If you had been captured and questioned, you couldn't reveal what you didn't know. The cold calculation behind such planning, the layers of deception, the contingencies for capture and interrogation, painted my son in a light I'd never considered before. The methodical accountant I'd raised had orchestrated an international whistleblowing operation, an escape plan worthy of an intelligence agency. "How do you fit into all this?" I asked Diane directly. "After 20 years of silence, you suddenly appear as Robert's trusted contact." Something flickered across her face, regret perhaps, or simply recognition of the complexity of her role. "It wasn't sudden, Helena. Robert and I reconnected 3 years ago when my agency was investigating financial irregularities that intersected with Global Meridian's operation." "Your agency?" I pressed. "I can't be more specific," she replied with practiced neutrality. "But when Robert realized what he had discovered, he reached out through channels we had established during that investigation. What he found went far beyond our initial concerns. The weapons dealing alone crossed multiple international jurisdictions. The landscape outside our windows gradually transformed from dense forest to scattered farmland as we continued eastward. Bettany slept on, her face peaceful in unconsciousness, blissfully unaware of the international intrigue surrounding her father's actions. "Does she know?" I asked Rachel quietly, nodding toward our granddaughter. "About her father's relationship with Diane?" Rachel shook her head. "Robert never mentioned her to me, not even when we were married. Whatever happened between them was something he kept completely private." The journey continued in relative silence, with brief stops only when absolutely necessary for restrooms or to switch vehicles, a precaution Diane insisted upon despite no obvious signs of pursuit. By late afternoon, we had reached the outskirts of Montreal, then continued north into increasingly rural territory. As dusk approached, Marcus turned onto a narrow gravel road that wound through thick woods for several miles before opening onto a clearing where a substantial log home stood, smoke curling invitingly from its chimney. My heart raced as we pulled up to the house, scanning the porch and windows for any sign of Robert. The front door opened as Marcus cut the engine. A figure stepped out, tall, familiar, despite the beard he'd grown since I'd last seen him, and my breath caught in my throat. "Daddy!" Bettany's cry shattered the moment as she bolted from the car, suddenly wide awake and running full tilt toward her father. Robert caught her in mid-leap, spinning her around as she wrapped her arms around his neck. The raw emotion on his face, joy, relief, love, told its own story of the sacrifice and worry he'd endured during our separation. Rachel and I approached more slowly, both overwhelmed in our own ways by this reunion that had seemed increasingly improbable with each passing day. When Robert finally set Bettany down, he embraced Rachel briefly before turning to me. "Mom," he said simply, his voice breaking slightly as he pulled me into a tight hug. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did what you asked," I replied, my own voice unsteady. "Though your instructions could have been a bit more detailed." A surprised laugh escaped him, the first genuine moment of lightness in this entire ordeal. "I'll remember that for the next international corruption scandal I expose." Inside, the house revealed itself to be both comfortable and strategically designed. Large windows offering clear sight lines to all approaches, multiple exit points, a basement level that could serve as a bunker if needed. Someone had prepared for our arrival with homemade soup simmering on the stove and beds made up with fresh linens. After Bettany had been fed, bathed, and settled into a bedroom with both parents taking turns telling her bedtime stories, Robert, Diane, and I gathered in the main room. The weight of unanswered questions hung between us, demanding address now that the immediate crisis of our escape had been resolved. "I owe you both explanations," Robert acknowledged, pouring 3 glasses of whiskey and passing them around. "Where to begin?" "The beginning would be traditional," I suggested, taking a seat by the fire. "How did a financial director at an investment firm stumble onto international crime that warranted all this?" I gestured around us at our current circumstance. Robert sighed, the sound carrying the burden of months of secrets. "It started with discrepancies in our humanitarian investment fund. Small inconsistencies that wouldn't trigger standard audits, but caught my attention because of their pattern. When I investigated, I found a shadow accounting system tracking the actual movement of funds to entities on international terrorism watch lists. And instead of walking away, you dug deeper," Diane added, her tone suggesting both admiration and exasperation. "I couldn't just ignore it," Robert defended. "Once I understood what was happening, that Global Meridian was using humanitarian aid as cover for weapons deals in conflict zones, that we were essentially profiting from both causing and alleviating suffering, I had to document everything. At extraordinary risk to yourself," I observed, "and ultimately to us." His expression clouded with guilt. "I never intended to involve either of you." "The plan was to compile the evidence, secure it off-site, then deliver it to Thomas Miller myself before disappearing. But they started watching me too closely. Every communication, every movement monitored." "So you used Bettany as your messenger," I said, unable to keep a hint of judgment from my voice. "A 7-year-old child." "It was Diane's suggestion," he admitted, glancing toward her. "Children are often invisible in security calculations. No one would suspect I'd entrust critical information to my daughter." Diane met my questioning gaze directly. "It was the safest option among bad choices, Helena. These people had already killed the CFO when he raised questions about certain transactions. Robert was next on their list. They were just gathering replacement options before eliminating him." The blunt assessment sent a chill through me, despite the fire's warmth. "And now? What happens now that the evidence is public? That arrests are being made?" Robert and Diane exchanged a look that communicated volumes about shared knowledge. "We've dealt a significant blow," Robert explained carefully. "But what you've seen in the news represents only the most visible players. There are others, government officials, intelligence assets, military contractors, whose names weren't in the files I leaked because their connections were too well obscured." "Meaning we're still in danger," I concluded. "Meaning we need to disappear," he corrected gently. "All of us. New identities, new location, new lives, at least until the full investigation concludes and all principals are accounted for." The magnitude of this statement, the complete abandonment of our former lives, settled over me like a physical weight. I thought of my home filled with decades of memories, my friends, my community, all left behind without proper goodbyes. "For how long?" I asked, the question that had haunted me since Rachel's arrival at the cabin. Robert and Diane exchanged another glance before he answered. "Minimum of 2 years, possibly longer." 2 years, I repeated, the number simultaneously shocking and yet somehow less devastating than the forever I had feared. "And then? Best case scenario? The investigation concludes successfully, all major players are prosecuted, and we can return with reasonable safety measures," Diane outlined. "Worst case? The corruption proves too deeply embedded, too protected by powerful interests, and a return becomes too dangerous to risk. I absorbed this assessment, searching for the right question among the hundreds swirling in my mind. Where will we go? New Zealand, Robert answered. Remote enough to be secure, stable government, English-speaking, good educational system for Bettany. His expression softened. We've secured a small farm property. Nothing extravagant, but comfortable. Room for all of us. All of us? Including Rachel? I couldn't help asking, glancing toward the hallway where she was still with Bettany. That's her choice, Robert replied carefully. But yes, arrangements have been made if she chooses to come. Bettany needs both her parents now more than ever. I nodded, understanding the priority of keeping their daughter's world as stable as possible despite everything else that had changed. And Diane? I'll oversee the transition, she answered. Ensure the new identities hold, that you're safely established. Then I returned to my work. The conversation continued late into the night, filling in the considerable gaps in my understanding. How Robert had gathered the evidence, how Diane had helped create our escape route, how the safe house in New Zealand had been secured through channels that couldn't be traced back to any of us. As midnight approached, exhaustion finally claimed me. Robert showed me to a comfortable bedroom, lingering at the door as I prepared to close it. I never properly thanked you, he said quietly. What you did, protecting Bettany, delivering the evidence, evading professional pursuers, it was extraordinary. I'm her grandmother, I replied simply. And your mother. There was no other choice. He smiled, the expression reminiscent of the little boy who had once looked at me with the same unwavering faith. Dad always said you were the strongest person he knew. I never fully understood what he meant until now. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating the journey that had brought me here and the one still to come. 2 years minimum in a foreign country, living under an assumed identity, leaving behind everything familiar. A complete reinvention at 68 years old. Yet as I prepared for sleep in this temporary safe haven, with my son, granddaughter, and even my former daughter-in-law all under one roof, I realized that what truly mattered had not been left behind at all. The essential core remained intact, my family, my values, my capacity to face whatever challenges lay ahead. From that first whispered warning in the airport, "He's gone. We need to leave now," to this moment of temporary sanctuary, I had been transformed, not just by circumstances beyond my control, but by my own choices in response to those circumstances. I had discovered capabilities I never knew I possessed, courage I had never needed to test, and a resolve that would now carry us forward into our uncertain future. Whatever waited in New Zealand, whatever new life we would build there, I would face it with the same determination that had brought us safely to this moment. Not just a grandmother protecting her family, but a woman who had stared down danger and found herself equal to its challenge. A woman who had heard a child's warning and changed everything. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this story, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who also likes this kind of story.